tuning into the Generational Gauntlet Top 5 Faves. This is the podcast where we give you our top 5 on a topic with a generational twist to it. My name is Matt Lambert, and I'm the host of this podcast. Each week, I bring in a guest who's from a different generation than me to discuss or debate our top 5 on a selected topic. Today is an episode of firsts. Since this podcast started, I have said I want to cover topics that interest the listeners. We've been getting some suggested topics coming in. We're getting those episodes set up to record. But today is the first time we hit one of those topics that someone has requested. That topic was the top 5 college basketball programs of all time. In that request, this same person asked for a specific person to be on the podcast who you're going to hear from here in a moment. During the podcast, you've heard from millennials, Gen Xers, and even a Gen Alpha. But today, a new generation, Gen Z, joins the podcast. I've also mentioned in a previous episode that I come from a basketball family. My grandfather, Larry Lambert Sr., was a basketball coach for years. So today, I'm bringing in one of my family members to talk about a basketball topic. And that person is a member of Gen Z, my cousin Maddie, who's a former hooper herself. So Maddie, welcome into the podcast. Can you talk a little bit about your basketball career?
Thanks. Well, thanks for having me first off. I'm excited to talk about this. I don't really remember when I started playing basketball. My mom told me that was probably about as young as 4 or 5, but I always thought it was 5 whenever people started playing basketball, buddy league and stuff like that, or biddy league, whatever you call it. So I did that. I played a lot of biddy league, and then when I played, as I was getting older, I did middle school basketball and high school basketball. I played all through high school. I did apparently have an offer to go to a small school. I think it was Davis and Elkins to go play basketball, and then I think Bluefield State, maybe. I don't really remember because it's been so long.
Yeah.
But after that point, I just wanted to go to school. I was about that point, just because they were smaller schools. It didn't seem like they had a lot of academic stuff for me to consider. And, college, when you're paying to go to college, you want to go to school and not waste a bunch of money hanging out there for a couple years and not knowing what you're doing,
No,
which was
I
my
hear
fear.
that. I know I was looking at the same thing for running, and I was getting scholarship offers from schools I had never heard from before. Like, I didn't know there was a Frostburg and a Frostburg State, and I learned that, and it was like, I'm not going to go to some school I've never heard of before. Now, you played ball, but you're a big fan of basketball as well, too, correct?
Yeah, I enjoy watching college ball. I'm not a huge fan of the NBA just because I feel that once they hit that point, it's no longer for the love of the game and it's just for the love of money. So it's really hard to watch because I feel I'm watching them argue with the refs more than I am watching them play the game.
That's a fair assessment. Who are your college basketball teams? Who do you follow?
Um, I follow Duke. Which that's kind of a funny story how that happened. And I'm a little embarrassed of that story, but I am glad that I stuck with it. There was a guy that I liked that was going to my youth group that was a huge fan of Duke basketball. And there was a bunch of people there that was a big fan. And so, of course, me being who I was like, what's all the hype about this? And then I ended up watching a couple games and just ended up really liking them. But yeah, I guess you can thank that boy that was in youth group for that interest. I am embarrassed about that, but it is a funny story.
That's all right. My dad is who got me into Duke basketball. I remember watching him early in the early 90s, and that's what got me locked in. So for any first-time listeners, this is how the podcast works. The two of us have agreed on this topic in advance. We each have put together our top 5 list on who is our top 5 college basketball programs. I don't know anything about Maddie's list. I have one that I speculate might be on there, but Maddie will kick things off. She'll give her number 5 and why. I'll give my number 5 and why, and we'll continue to go back and forth until we reach each of our number 1s. So with that in mind, Maddie, I'm going to kick it over to you. Who is your top 5 college basketball program of all time?
My number 5 was, I chose UCLA. just because when you look up NCAA championships, I think that's a big factor that you have to look at. And yeah, they won a lot of them way back when, but to have 11 NCAA championships is a lot of NCAA championships to have at all, and a lot of those are back to back. However, I think the last time that I've ever heard of UCLA like being like an extremely talked about team was when it was the 2021 NCAA tournament and they were playing Gonzaga in the Final Four, and it was a super, super close game because that's how that good they were. I
Hmm.
think Johnny Juzang was on that team. He had played at Kentucky before them.
I I like the UCLA entry. I've got them on my list, maybe a little bit higher than number 5, but I won't say much more about UCLA just yet because they're on my list as well.
That's
So,
fair.
in terms of my list, I'm gonna tell you how I kind of compiled my data. My data points that I used was championships, Final Four appearances, how many times you made the NCAA tournament. I looked at things like career winning percentage, Player of the Year awards, and did you have first round NBA or WNBA draft picks? And Maddie and I are both Duke basketball fans, and this is the most painful thing I've said on this podcast. But number 5 for me is North Carolina men's basketball. And I get it. If you look at their program right now, they're kind of a disaster. But UNC's won 6 national titles, which is tied for third most all time. We're talking all the way back in the 50s for their first title, one in the 80s, one in the 90s, two in the 2000s, and the last one in 2017. So we've got a span of time that they've won titles in. They're the all time men's leader in Final Four appearances with 21. 3 men have won Player of the Year for them. Some guy named Michael Jordan, Antoine Jameson, and Tyler Hansborough. They have the third most NBA players drafted all time with 55, and 2 of those went number 1 overall, which is tied for the third most in NBA history. Both Dean Smith and Roy Williams won titles there. They have the second highest winning percentage among all men's teams with 73%. They have the second highest NCAA tournament appearances all time with 54. And you go through the names, you've got guys like Michael Jordan, Antoine Jameson, Tyler Hansborough, Vince Carter, Stackhouse, James Worthy, Sam Perkins, and Bob McAdoo. And as a Duke fan, I love nothing more than to see this team lose. But historically, they have more titles than Duke, more Final Four appearances, more tournament appearances, and a lifetime higher winning percentage. So for me on my list, Duke doesn't rank in the top 5. They were number 6. They were edged out by our biggest enemy, UNC. So that's my number 5, Maddie. I'll kick it back over to you for your number 4.
Okay. So I went more of the like the I think college men's basketball route with
Okay.
all-time basketball just because I watch some of women's college but not enough that like I can really form an opinion. I went with Kentucky for my number 4
Okay.
again because I was thinking men's college basketball once upon a time. I mean, I guess they still kind of are, but given the circumstances, they were a powerhouse at one point. Good winning records, lots of first round draft picks, as you were talking about, and many, many appearances in Final Fours, Elite Eight, Sweet 16. All the rounds in the NCAA tournament. But I would definitely say they would have to be my number 4 because I feel like in the last couple of years, even before Calipari's departure, they had just struggled. And I think a lot of that was due to the one and done rule
Yeah.
and now even the transfer rule. I think that's caused a lot of issues for your powerhouses in college basketball because, um, that's hard to form team chemistry and to put together a winning team if none of your players are sticking around.
No, you're totally right. And even though I went both men and women, I have the same number 4 as you. I have Kentucky men's basketball as my number 4. And I'll give some additional numbers here. So you mentioned it. They've got titles. They've got 8 national titles in total, 2 from the 1940s, 2 from the 50s, 2 in the 70s, 1 in the 90s, and 1 being all the way back in 2012. So we're talking sustained greatness over time. They have the second most NCAA titles in men's NCAA history, 17 Final Four appearances, which is the fourth most. And they actually have the highest men's winning percentage all time at 76%. The most NCAA tournament appearances all time was 62 appearances. 2 men have won Player of the Year. and they've been an NBA factory. They have 60
Uh-huh.
men who have been drafted in the first round of the NBA draft. Three of those were the overall number one pick, which is the second most by a school in NBA history. They've got four coaches in the Hall of Fame. And I'm a quick trivia question for you, Maddie. Do you know who those four coaches are that are in the Hall of Fame?
No, I'm gonna be so honest.
That's okay. You mentioned one. One was Calipari, Rick Pitino, Eddie Sutton, who ironically didn't even win a title with the team, and then Adolph Rupp, who's the winningest coach in Kentucky history. They've had five different coaches win a championship. Rupp won four, Joe B. Hall won one, Rick Pitino won, Tubby Smith won, and John Calipari won. And if you look at the NBA, Kentucky has its fingerprints all over it. You mentioned now we've got a lot of parity. We got people leaving after 1 year. We've got the transfer portal. But for a period of time, if you went to Kentucky, you were getting drafted. We got
Mhm.
guys like Anthony Davis, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Cat, Devin Booker, John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, Jamal Mashburn, Rajon Rondo, Jamal Murray, Bam Adebayo, Julius Randle, Antoine Walker, and the list goes on. So for all the titles, the final four appearances, I had to put Kentucky number four on the list. I'll kick it back to you to hear your number three.
Again, I went the men's college basketball route, just because, I mean, I do like watching women's basketball, but I would have to say my number 3 would be UConn's men's basketball, and that's going off the fact that I think they are now up on, like, I wanna say either they're number 4 or number 3 with the most championship titles, and there was back-to-back that they won them, and that was in recent years, and these are like last couple of years, you've just seen UConn like men's basketball climb the ranks, sort of like the women's, just a good record, appearing in the tournament and just like having an absolute powerhouse of a team. Now, last year, I admit, was a little bit of a struggle year for them because they had seemed to have lost some of their players from the previous 2 NCAA championship teams, but, they'd still had a good record, still appeared in the tournament despite all of that, and so I think that's why they're my number 3 was because they're starting to climb the ranks and, poke their head up as what could be a solid men's, basketball program.
No, you're spot on. You mentioned all the titles they have. I think they're tied for third all time now with UNC with six titles. I, if I might be incorrect on this, but I believe they're actually 6-0 in NCAA championship games, which is just phenomenal when you don't lose. And
Mhm.
then I think they're 12-1 in Final Four appearances, which is the best in NCAA appearance. So it's funny. UConn men's were in my top 10. They didn't make my top five, but I agree with you. They are definitely a team that is on the up and coming. And we could definitely see them move further up, I think, both of our lists over the next few years, depending on what shakes out. My number three, I went to the women's ranks, and I went with Tennessee women's basketball. And Tennessee has 8 championships. And I'm going to give some context to that number. NCAA men started crowning champions back in 1939. Women did not start crowning champions until 1982. So in 40 years, less time, Tennessee has as many championships as the second highest in men's history. If you throw in both men and women, they are third ever for either men or women. Tennessee's won 2 titles in the 80s. They dominated the 1990s with 4 championships. Maddie, I know that's a little bit before your time. And then they added 2 more titles in the 2000s. Tennessee's went to 18 Final Fours, the second most in women's history. They've gone to all 43 NCAA tournaments for women. They've never been left out. They're number 2 in women's history for winning percentage with 79%, which is higher than any men's team in history. They have 4 Players of the Year award winners, 21 women drafted in the first round of the WNBA draft, and 2 of those women were the number 1 overall pick, which is tied for second all time. Tennessee has one of the greatest coaches in women's history. Pat Summitt was the first to ever reach 1,000 wins. She was the head coach for all 8 of their natties. And Tennessee women's basketball is a who's who of greatness. You've got ladies like Shamika Holesclaw, who led them to 3 straight national titles, Candace Parker, Tamika Catchings, Bridget Gordon, Kara Lawson. If you combine men and women's basketball, Tennessee has the third most championships all time, men or women. They're tied for fourth most Final Fours all time, the second highest winning percentage in basketball history. So for the sustained greatness from the 80s to the 2000s, I had to put them number 3 on my list. So, Maddie, I'll be curious to hear your number 2.
So my number 2, I went with UNC's men's basketball. They are still producing absolute phenomenal players and recruiting phenomenal players. And they're still a powerhouse even when Roy Williams retired and I do not want to butcher his name, but Hubert Davis stepped into that role. They, even as a first year coach, like went to the NCAA championship and were the runner ups, and so it
Hmm.
was just there was just no disruption in the flow. And so they still just are phenomenal. Yeah, they've had a couple of struggle years, which is why I had them at number 2, but it's just been nothing that was noticeable, and every team has a year or two that within, their time that they have a not great year, but it still has not stopped them. They still end up doing phenomenal, or making the NCAA tournament, so that's why I had them at number 2.
I can appreciate the fact that both of us are massive Duke fans, and we could put our fandom aside to both put UNC in the top 5. Like you said it, you can't argue with the wins they've had, the long-term success, the players they've produced. As much as I dislike them, and I love to watch them get upset, I love to watch them lose, it, you can't dispute facts. So I have no complaints over you having them in your top 5 because I mean, I did it as well.
I do have to be honest, I am not that big into the rivalry to the point, like, I like to create fights or laugh at their despair. I just enjoy watching good basketball, and so, I mean, obviously, anytime Duke plays them, I want Duke to win because I like Duke, but at the same time, I'm always checking in with UNC to see how they're doing just because they have that. I think Caleb Wilson's his name, and he's just an absolute stud of an athlete, and so I'm always checking in with them just to see what's going on, and they seem that they're doing really good this year,
Hmm.
despite it all, so we'll see what happens.
You're a better person than me because when UNC loses, anybody that I'm friends with that's a UNC fan gets a text from me. My number 2, you had him on your list, you had him lower, but I put UCLA men's basketball as number 2. And I agree with you. The current success, it's not really there, but they have the second most NCAA championships in history with 11. Their most recent was 1995, but under Wooden, they were a juggernaut. They won every championship from 1964 until 1973. And then they won again in 1975. From 71 to 74, they won 88 straight basketball games. Plus, they have another 40 game winning streak thrown in there. UCLA has been to 19 Final Fours, which is the second most in men's basketball history. They have 51 NCAA tournament appearances, the fourth most in NCAA history. They have won 6 Players of the Year award, and they have 43 guys that have been selected in the first round of the NBA draft. They have 2 number 1 overall selections, which is tied for third most in NCAA history. We have arguably the greatest coach in history, John Wooden. He'd be there for 10 of their titles. And I'll save gushing over Wooden as coaches might be a list for another day, but he's for sure a top fiver for me. Then you look at their players. We've got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, formerly Lou Alcindor, who's arguably the greatest basketball player of all time in terms of college. He won 3 Player of the Year awards. Bill Walton was another 3-time Player of the Year award winner. They've got guys like Gil Goodrich, Reggie Miller, Ed O'Bannon, Jamal Wilkes. And if we go more recent, we can look at guys like Kevin Love, Russell Westbrook, Lonzo Ball, and Baron Davis. So for me, based on, even though it's historical, I agree with you, Maddie, it's a long time ago, but the total number of championships, the Final Four appearances, and the absolute legacy they left, I had to put UCLA at number 2 on my list. So curious to hear who made number 1. I'm wondering if it's the team that I think is going to make number 1 on your list.
Well, obviously, it's definitely Duke just because, like, even then, like, I do like them, I think right now, they're very much getting lucky with the games that they're winning, because I've never seen horrible free throw shooting in my life, and I was telling my mom because when they lost to Texas Tech, she said something, and I go, "I don't care about that." I said, "The only thing I'm thinking about right now is I can think about how Cam Boozer can do everything else except shoot a 15-foot shot behind a line with nobody in his face, and he's still gonna go to the NBA draft, and we've all just acknowledged it, and there's just no way." But I also have qualms about free throw shooting all around. I feel like me and Dad and Diana went and watched, some basketball games recently. We went and watched Braxton County and Polka because one of Dad's friends' sons plays for Braxton County, and
Mhm.
just the Braxton County did okay, but like the free throw shooting again, I go, none of you have ever had a coach yelling and screaming at you when you missed your free throws, and it shows because there's no way. Absolutely no way. Grandpa would be rolling over in his grave right now if he saw it. He really would. It's so bad. Um, but that was all redeemed last night. We went and watched Buffalo and Braxton County play, and Buffalo has an absolute squad of a team this year. All very tiny, but all very aggressive and fast, and they practice their free throws. So, I'm rooting for them because they look like they know how to shoot a 15-foot shot behind a line. So, uncontested. But other than that, uh, I just think the culture there surrounding Duke, Coach K being an absolute just stud of a coach, with what
Mhm.
he's accomplished and all the players that he's just produced, to the NBA, and that what he's just capable of recruiting. And John Shire, when he stepped into that role, everybody was a little nervous, and he still is just continuing that legacy. I think he still obviously has some work to do, and I'm not a college coach, so I'm not going to be giving pointers, although I am going to say make your team practice their free throws because it makes me sad. Um, and I hate watching it. But he's just not let that stop. They made a Final Four appearance. His second, no, it was Elite Eight or Final Four. I can't really
Mhm.
remember because it all starts to blend together at some points. But I think it was Elite Eight. His second year coaching. Yeah, they made round of 32. His first year coaching, but they had to play Tennessee, and Tennessee was a good team that year, and Duke was slightly struggling, but not enough for it to be a terrible thing. And then his third year coaching, Final Four. And I think they got a really good chance to go all the way this year if they just work on that team chemistry and those free
Mhm.
throws.
Maddie, can I just say that I love that you're like, "Hey, I am not gonna give people a hard time in the rivalry. I'm gonna be, just respectful." And then the hill you died on is free throws. Like
Because it's easy points. You are 15 foot away from the basket and you're telling me you can't do it? Don't even. No. No excuses.
No, I agree. It is. I mean, they call it the charity stripe for a reason. They call it a free throw for a reason. It just cracks me up that that is where you're like, I am full send on this. This is the hill I die on. Free throws, make them. So I appreciate it.
Well, it's just like I said, it's so easy. I mean, it looks impressive when you can shoot a three, but when you make 8 threes, but if you can't make a single free throw, um, I'm over it. I'm over it. There's no way you're telling me. And my stepdad was talking. He goes, "Well, I mean, if you're a typical 3-point shooter, which is everybody nowadays, apparently, going to watching again high school basketball, nobody was driving into the bucket. They were shooting threes, and I go, "You guys can't do that this whole entire time." But my stepdad was just like, "It's so hard, like, to go from that transition to shooting a free throw," and I'm like, "It shouldn't be if you're a good shooter. It should not be. I don't know what your excuse is, but that's not the answer."
Well, that's because Steph Curry has ruined the game of basketball because everybody thinks they can shoot like him and they can't. He's an anomaly, and I hate the way that it's changed this game of 3-point shooting. I'm with you. I wish people would drive. There's a lot of fundamentals that are being lost by the younger generation today.
Yeah, some of them can't dribble with their left hand, and I get it. Like, I'm left-handed, and so that's a big talk for me, but there is no way Grandpa Lambert would have let me walk onto a basketball court if I couldn't dribble with both hands. And, and it's funny because Dad told me this story. I'd like to check tape, maybe bust out the Ouija board if we can, of that Grandpa said I was one of the greatest guards that he would never get to coach, and I think that was a big old lie. Maybe a great defensive player he wouldn't get to coach because I wasn't interested in scoring. I just wanted to get blocks and rebounds and steal the ball. That's all I cared about.
You know what, Maddie? We don't need a Ouija board. I'm gonna go. You were the greatest athlete he never got to coach. There you go.
Oh, don't lie. You know where liars go. Don't lie.
Well, let me tell you in one area I'm not lying, and that's with my number one. And if you've listened to this podcast before, you know when it gets to a number one, I've got to have some stats to back it up. And before I looked at the data, I knew who my number one was. It was going to be UConn women's basketball. So before I give some stats, I've watched UConn play once in person. I was living in Virginia at the time, watched them play Old Dominion. I think I was in middle school. And at an Old Dominion home game, at least at the time, they had this tradition that they stood until their team scored a bucket. And we ended up standing, I think it was for 10 minutes because UConn was beating the brakes off of them. So here's why they're my number one. The NCAA men have been crowning champions since 1939. The women, it came in more than 40 years later at 1982. The NBA has had 79 drafts. The WNBA has had 50 less with 29. Even with that huge disparity of numbers, UConn, the women, beats men basketball programs in almost every single categories. So Jay-Z had this famous line in A Dream, and he said, "Nobody built like you, you designed yourself." And UConn has designed an entire legacy. They're number one in championships all time with 12 NCAA titles. They won their first in 95, and then these are the years they've won since then. So 95, they won in 2000, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2009, 2010, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2025. They've gone to 24 Final Fours, which is the most of any men or women's teams. Out of 43 NCAA tournaments for women, UConn has been to more than half of the Final Fours, and they've won 27% of all the titles, which is unheard of. I mentioned earlier, UCLA had an 88-game winning streak. Yeah, UConn smashed that with 111 games from 2014 to 2017. I know that UCLA had the run of titles from 64 to 73, but I find it more impressive that UConn has won in 4 different decades. They took a 9-year break and they're back. UConn's been to 36 NCAA tournaments. That's number 4 all time for women, but they have the highest winning percentage for men or women with 80.4% of their games that they win. 11 women from UConn have won Player of the Year. Their Women's Player of the Year award wasn't even handed out until 1983. Here's who's brought it home for UConn. Rebecca Lobo in 95, Sue Bird in 02, Diana Taurasi in 03 and 04, Maya Moore in 09 and 2011, Tina Charles in 2010, Breonna Stewart, 3 straight from 2014 to 16, and Paige Beckers in 21. And if you know anything about women's basketball, I just named some of the greatest players to do it in both college and WNBA history. Speaking of the WNBA, UConn has 27 first-round draft picks. There have been only 29 WNBA drafts, so they average a first-rounder every year. They have 6 number 1 overall picks, which is the most in WNBA history, and if you throw in the NBA draft, it's tied for the most. Gino Auriemma, their coach, holds the NCAA record for men or women with wins, winning percentage, and championships. And just like UConn overwhelmed their opponents for 111 straight games, they overwhelmed me with their stats, and they're why they've got to be number 1 on my list all time. Now, Maddie, I know you only looked at men's basketball, but can you at least agree with me that UConn women are a great program?
Oh yeah. If I were to do like my top 5 women's basketball, I like would have to really think hard on 4 or 5, but I think definitely like UConn would be my number 1. South
Mm-hmm.
Carolina, for all they've accomplished too, would be like my number 2 because they've absolutely become a powerhouse as well.
They have.
Just with everything that they've done, from having the undefeated seasons like UConn to going to the NCAA tournament and making their appearances. And then I would have to say my number 3 would be Iowa, just because,
Mm,
Caitlin Clark, she accomplished so much in her time at Iowa, and she led her team to such great success. And I think they're still doing decent without her, although it's hard to replace, Caitlin Clark, and everything that she has done. I think, though, that one person that people do need to be on the lookout for is Juju Watkins. I think she could be what we would consider the next Caitlin Clark or better, although unfortunately she is out for right now just because she tore her ACL at a very inconvenient time as they were progressing through the tournament,
Hmm.
and they did okay without her. But again, it's one of those moments of I don't think those teams relied heavily on those players per se, as much as it's hard to replace, somebody like Juju or Caitlin whenever they go down. And so I think that for your listeners, that's somebody that I would be looking out for is Juju Watkins, because I watched her play for USC, and boy, oh boy, she is an athlete, and I love watching her play.
Oh, she's phenomenal. And I don't know if you agree with this, but I feel like women's basketball has had a major glow up over the last few years. And I think some of that's attributed to obviously Caitlin Clark, but we're seeing just some freaks of nature in women's basketball with Juju. You've got Clark. There's a girl, I think it's at like Iowa State, and I'm drawing a blank on her name right now, but she's just a monster. But I mean, are you in agreement that
Oh,
women's basketball
Audie
is on the rise?
Crooks.
Yes, yes, there we go. I mean, do you
Yeah.
agree on women's basketball, though, just blowing up right now?
Yeah, and then I also it's also super funny because, like, I've also been seeing a lot of discourse about, like, how good Caitlin Clark really is, and, of course, it's a bunch of men who would tell you that they would have been a stud if they wouldn't have blew out their ACL in the, JV game in high school, saying that they can beat her, and I'm like, "Maybe in your dreams you might be able to do that, but let's all calm down now." So I think there's that too, but I also think, like, I just think we're seeing such a just increase in viewership of, women's sports because, like,
Mhm.
well, women's basketball more specifically, just because, like, I think it's getting to the point that people are seeing, like, how capable, like, women can be, even then, like, they're not as, I mean, and I hate to say it, like, not as athletic as men in the sense of, like, you don't really get to watch them dunk or do all the crazy things, but they have to focus on the fundamentals, and so whenever they're, like, killing it in the fundamentals, it's, like, fun to watch them. You wanna watch a girl who can shoot three-pointers, you wanna watch a girl who has, crafty moves to the bucket, like, it's becoming something special.
And Maddie, from what I've heard you say earlier, you probably like that they hit their free throws, right?
They do. They hit their free throws. They do because, they can't dunk their way out of a situation, but you know what they can do? Hit a 15-foot shot with nobody in their face.
Well, Maddie, I appreciate you jumping on here with me today. I did not know we were going to talk about free throws so much, and this has brought me pure joy. But thank you for jumping in here.
Yeah, no problem.
As your dad said, and as I'm going to say, you were the greatest athlete our grandpa never got to coach. For all the listeners, I appreciate you all listening in. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, let someone know to check this thing out. As I always say, I want this podcast to cover topics that interest you. We're covering one that someone sent in today. So if you have a top 5 list that you want us to rank, or if you have a person that you would like to suggest, even if that's yourself, I take suggestions at generationalfave5@gmail.com. That's generational FAVE, the number 5 at gmail.com. Thank you all for tuning in.